So it looks like the Grey Knights are turning up the heat and sweeping the battlefield clean in a cleansing halo of fire. There's the potential for full rerolls to hit across the entire army, so let's see what this big damage detachment can do. Hello and welcome back to Warspec Tactics, where today we're looking at another Grotmas detachment, and this time it's the turn of the Knights of Titan. As we know at this point, the Grotmas Advent calendar gives us new 40k rules content every single day, one new detachment per faction in the game, all fully playable in tournaments and everything absolutely immediately, and coming to the app in January. It feels like Games Workshop have been going fairly Imperial heavy over the last few, though we did have some Chaos Knights with the Imperials yesterday, though in any case day 10 is for the Grey Knights, and tomorrow we've got Core Codex Space Marines, saying that they've been brushing up on their books or something. I don't know if that's trying to imply something Chaplain or Librarian themed maybe. For this one, let's focus on the Grey Knights though. Their 10th edition rules have been fairly different to how a lot of people might have expected, deciding to make them basically the 40k teleport army, an army rule that has their units blink off the board, and then their core detachment was a further doubling down on their teleport shenanigans, with things like 3-inch deep strikes and return to reserve things, which is meant to balance with those powerful movement shenanigans. They've generally had slightly underwhelming damage and defensive profiles compared with the rest of armies out there, so their armies might often have a fair bit more emphasis on clever scoring and gameplay shenanigans. Currently at the moment they feel a little bit lower mid in tournaments, win rates are around about 46%, which dropped a bit from around about 50 prior to the last update. I'm not 100% sure what caused that drop. On paper they basically just got some small boosts to a couple of units, though I guess the small nerf to secret missions might have impacted them a bit I guess. Otherwise though, like quite a few armies in 10th edition, their datasheets have at least some okay internal balance within the army. Most competitive armies tend to go at least fairly Dread Knight heavy, given that they're the only real efficient damage dealers against enemy tanks and vehicles that also use their detachment rules well. But most of their other unique units are usable enough. Often a squad of Terminators with Caldor Drago makes an appearance, Librarians are often staples for a bunch of mortal wound damage, and after several waves worth of points revisions, I feel like all of their power armoured units can have a role if you want to make them work, even if a lot of lists do seem to pass up things like the Purgation Squads and Purifiers. In any case, we know that their codex will be coming within 2025, Games Workshop had confirmed that, and I guess that'll bring some other detachments with other themes that you might expect of the army. I wouldn't be too surprised to see a psychic focused detachment. So as with a few of these Grotmas detachments, they might be a little bit weirder and different to what you might expect. For this detachment though, the Grey Knights have got a Warpbane task force. The idea behind this is that it's a Grey Knight force aims to cleanse the taint of chaos from a corrupted world, sending in a force heavy with purifiers, blasting chaos tainted ground before them with a halo of cleansing flame, driving the souls of the unclean and demons before them, and within the ensorcelled consecrated battleground that they create, the Grey Knights can fight even better than before. It feels like it's the counterpart of the Thousand Suns Battlefield Warping detachment, though it does feel like it's a bit more impactful than that one to me. And as with the rest of the detachments, that'll basically replace the 6-inch auto advance that you get from the teleport strike force, though in reality the things that people have missed more from that are things like Mists of Deimos, 3-inch deep strikes, and the Sigil of Exigence, and also true silver armour, which isn't here. That's really quite a lot of valuable stuff to miss out on, so it does mean that this detachment would have to be pretty strong to compete. Speaking of which, let's get into the detachment rules proper though. The core rule for this Warpbane task force is Hallowed Ground, and again it's one of those zone of control type abilities similar to Canoptek Court or Chaos Demons. Like those ones, the battlefield is divided into 3 different zones of control. Your deployment zone always counts as Hallowed Ground. If you want to make No Man's Land Hallowed Ground, you need to hold at least half of the objectives in it at the start of any phase. And the same is true of the enemy deployment zone, usually just holding the one marker in their own deployment zone. On top of that though, Purifier squads also generate a bubble of hallowed ground. Everything within 6 inches of them counts as that, and that basically means that they'll always count as being within hallowed ground themselves. This will make a whole bunch of their stratagems better, but also makes their core damage roll really quite good. Basically the army gets 2 reroll all hit rolls for each unit that's wholly within hallowed ground, and on top of that you also get 2 reroll hit rolls of 1 outside of the hallowed ground as well. I feel like as it goes this one's a pretty great start. Getting at least somewhat easy access to army-wide reroll hits is kind of massive. For every Grey Knight unit that's hitting on a 3+, it's essentially a 33% damage increase inside the zone of control. That's still a handy enough 17% even if you're outside it. I feel like this could definitely tip the balance with a whole bunch of Grey Knight units feeling significantly more scary than otherwise. It seems strong enough for basically whatever you'd want to use it on. Dread Knights would enjoy it, as would Terminator squads. Both range and melee damage getting drastically better if you can remain within the hallowed ground. It could be reliable for Grey Knight shooting units as well if you wanted to take them. though maybe just a little bit less important for anything that hits on a 2+, like say Paladins. Overall definitely feels way more impactful than the automatic 6 inches advance, which is mainly just good for Dread Knights, though it's not really a fair one-for-one comparison given that the main index detachment strengths all come from stratagems and enhancements and things. Before we move on to the stratagems for this detachment, I thought I'd just give a shout out to today's video sponsor for an up and coming gaming store in Canada, Toy Snowman. They've had a hobby and collectible store for the last 5 years or so, but have now decided to get into Warhammer in a big way, stocking a fair few of the Joy Toy 40k figures, and gradually building up and expanding their inventory of mainline 40k models. They sell Games Workshop's miniatures at 15% off prices, the max that sellers are normally allowed to discount in North America. Shipping's free on any order over $150 Canadian, and they can back order miniatures through Games Workshop with their email address here. In any case, if you're in Canada and looking for some discount models, feel free to check out their web store linked in the video description. It seems easy enough to search to find out what they've got in stock. And here's their gaming store based in Montreal. In any case, a massive thank you to them for sponsoring the video. Feel free to check them out, links down in the video description below. Getting back to puritanical stratagems now though, and first up for one command point we've got Sanctified Killzone. This one basically takes Purifier's damage to the absolute next level, because if they're within hallowed grounds they'll be re-rolling the hit rolls, and then also with this stratagem they can also re-roll the wound rolls as well, and they get that either shooting or fighting. For a 10-man Purifier squad with their Strength 6, AP 2 and Damage 2 force weapons, that's going to be a ridiculously massive threat to basically any unit in the game, hitting with almost everything, and then even stacking a bunch of saves on things that wound on 6s, though if you're wounding on a 5 or better, there's a pretty good chance they'll kill most normal size units. They could also use this in the shooting phase as well. Their Purifying Flames will typically wound on a 2+ if they can target infantry, but given that they can spam a whole load of Stormbolter shots as well, again 4 rerolls to wound could mean that you're just stacking lots and lots of saves on any target that's toughness 7 or less, and again combos with the 4 rerolls to hit that they'd have. Other units can use this as well, but they just get 2 reroll wound rolls of 1. Not awful in a pinch if you need every bit of damage, but certainly nowhere near as powerful as the 4 wound rerolls. Basically this with the detachment rule though makes Purifier squads absolutely lethal. Next up for one command point there's Flames of Sanctity. This one gives you D3 mortal wounds to each enemy unit within 6 inches of a Purifier squad. If for each one you manage to roll a dice roll of a 4+, you trigger it at the end of the fight phase, and if Castellan and Crows in the unit then it's a 3+ rather than a 4. I guess the idea is that they might have just charged and destroyed a unit, and I guess you could use this either if they just happen to be right in the middle of the enemy army with loads of units in range, or perhaps a bit more likely I think if say there's just something that they haven't quite been able to kill, perhaps a tank on 2 wounds left or something like that, then perhaps you could use this as a last ditch effort to try and finish them off. I think in general it's rarely going to be all that worth it for pure damage, but it's probably one to look out for just in case it could come in handy. Next up we've got Fires of Covenant. This one is another mortal wound flamey type one. Triggered at the start of the movement phase, and you select one Grey Knight infantry unit to be the target. Then for the enemy's movement phase, if they move a unit within 6 inches of your squad, you roll a dice and on a 4+ you get D3 mortal wounds, and that's boosted to a 2+ if your unit's within hallowed ground. I feel like this one's a potentially interesting sort of area denial style one. It's probably best if you've got a Grey Knight infantry unit that's just charged something very aggressively, and then the rest of your opponent's army is going to be wanting to move up the board and potentially move around it. Even like 5 models or so strung out could be really quite big in terms of covering a lot of the board. And if they could do that and get lots of enemy units that will definitely need to move past them, maybe it could be enough damage. Again though, it perhaps feels a little bit on the situational side, and I can't help but think that if the unit's going to be that exposed, there's a good chance the enemy will be destroying them as they're right on the front lines, and kind of awkwardly it doesn't really stop an enemy unit just from wandering up to them and charging them and destroying them, as you could just move the units to just outside of 6 inches away, and then you don't trigger the rule, and then you just charge them in the charge phase, which does feel like a fairly easy workaround. Next up for one command point we've got Aegis Eternal. This one's a reactive durability buff against enemy shooting, triggered when a Grey Knight infantry unit gets shot, and they get a 4+ invulnerable save if the models are entirely within hallowed ground. Again, this one seems very aimed at Purifiers. I guess could be handy for strike squads and Inceptors and things as well, given that Terminators already get a 4+ invulnerable anyway. I guess the shooting that they're going to be doing would have to be at least fairly high AP. It's going to need to be AP 3 at minimum to matter, and even then it might not matter if the unit's in cover. I think it definitely could come up from time to time, but this one's a far worse stratagem to have access to than their true silver armour, where worsening the AP can be really impactful on 2+ save units. Next up, for one command point we've got Hallowed Beacon. This one's potentially a really easy delivery into melee. A non-Terminator infantry unit can set up anywhere that's 6 inches away from enemy units, provided you put it entirely within hallowed ground when it arrives from Deep Strike or Teleport Assault in your reinforcement phase. This one might have a bit of an issue with it for the timing, as when this happens the opponent will just have had their turn. Unless the battle's going great for you, there's a good chance that they'll have denied objectives to you, at least to the point where you don't have half or more of the midfield, and if so, at this point you won't have had a chance to move to reclaim control of the midfield before the stratagem has to trigger. The Hallowed Ground thing will be tested at the very start of the movement phase. As a result, to be a little bit more limited, but probably most reliable on it getting purifiers to be able to do it. If you had a purifier unit, then they could move up and allow some close range deep strikes to get some other units to combat. And I guess potentially you could have some purifiers arrive from Teleport Assault, and then they would be on the board to allow this rule to happen. So you could have them deep strike at 9 inches, and then the delivered squad deep strike at 6. It definitely feels like it has potential though, getting really easy 6-inch charges. They've got a very, very high chance to pass if you budget command points to re-roll them. It seems nice. I feel like this is one of the stronger ones for the detachment. Finally, for 1 command point, we've got Repelling Sphere. The Grey Knight's making a shield of repelling force. You declare this at the start of the enemy charge phase, so not just when your unit gets charged. It's a -1 to charges for an infantry unit, boosted to a -2 to charge for a unit within Hallowed Ground. I feel like usually the -1 is a bit borderline to be worth bothering with. Deny a charge is big, but with the -1 it's only going to be impactful of 1 out of every 6 charge rolls, sort of like gambling on throwing a 6. The -2 I think has enough value to justify though. Anything that's a 6-inch charge or more could well be a good target, and it could be quite nice if your opponent's trying to charge you out of deep strike with a 9-inch charge. You could make that very, very unlikely indeed. Overall, out of the stratagems, I feel like maybe the deep strike delivery one and the reroll wounds for purifiers perhaps feel like the better ones out of the bunch. A fair few of the rest just feel a little bit more situational to me. Moving on though, and we've got the enhancements, which I must admit don't really feel like the detachment's strong point. It doesn't really help that purifiers don't have any generic characters that can lead them. They can only be joined by Castell and Crow under current rules, and that does feel like a bit of an issue for making the enhancements relevant, given that they're such a focal unit for the detachment. First up, we've got Modulian Reliquary, which is 20 points for +3 OC to the bearer if they're not battle shocks. That one really just isn't very good for 20 points. I guess you could get, say, a Grandmaster Dread Knight up to OC 7, but still I just really don't think that that's worth it for the cost. There's Radiant Champion for 15 points. This one's infantry only, and it's a fairly good melee boost. When you're fighting in close combat on Hallowed Ground, you get 1 mortal wound per successful wound roll. You get that in addition to normal damage, and also your attacks gain precision as well if you didn't already have it, so you don't need to pay any command points for Epic Challenge. For 15 points, if you've got any sort of infantry character that does want to get mixed up in close combat, that does seem absolutely well worth it to me. I feel like a lot of the more standard things like Grandmasters, Brother Captains, and Champions tend to be a bit more on the niche side though. Maybe more commonly seeing Librarians, Drago, Dread Knight Grandmasters, and maybe Castell and Crow in this detachment, but I guess this could be another thing that tips the scales in the balance of running at least one. Next up, we've got File of the Abyss. That's 25 points, and it gives you stealth for an infantry unit. I guess doesn't really hurt, and 25 points seems okay for that. Again, kind of a shame that you can't take it on the purifiers, given that there's a big incentive to run some big squads of them. Perhaps could be a reasonable enough one for Terminators. You are going to want things that can be tanky on the midboard, and maybe a Terminator or Paladin squad could be a good place for that if they have a leader. Finally, for 10 points, we've got Paragon of Sanctity. This one hands out a little bit more Hallowed Ground once per game. At the start of any phase, you get to select one unit within 18 inches, and that counts as being within Hallowed Ground for the phase. So I guess that could be upgrading reroll 1s to hit to full rerolls to hit, or maybe allow units to use some of the stratagems or get boosted versions of them. I think for 10 points this one seems pretty reasonable. If you've got them left over, I'd probably stick it anywhere that could take it, just to give you a little bit more flexibility and some extra damage for one phase. Overall though, I don't really think that the enhancement section is all that strong. Nothing really feels too game changing here, and due to the lack of options for characters to lead purifiers, it just doesn't feel like it's got enormous synergy with the detachment as a whole. I guess maybe if the Codex changed character attachment rules of some way or another, perhaps they could be a little bit more relevant if, say, champions could lead purifiers or something like that. Overall, I feel like the detachment does have some interesting stuff, though does also have some massive downsides. Perhaps the single highlight is that core detachment rule, which is just incredibly strong. Army-wide rerolls of 1 to hit, and often being full rerolls to hit. That's a damage boost unlike virtually any army in the game can get quite that easily. It might force the Grey Knights to play in a very different way to their more teleport-style detachment though. Really big incentive for them to take and hold the mid-board early, so likely would want some sort of tanky units to do that. I guess Terminators, Paladins, or Strike Marines might be the way to go. In general, it just means that if you had Grey Knight units that were struggling for damage a lot, they'll be far, far scarier here. It's certainly helpful for Dread Knights as well. Both their Psy Cannons and their Demon Hammonds in melee are going to be immensely scary with this. Otherwise, from the other supporting bits, I feel like it's a bit weaker than several detachments out there. To my mind, the only things that feel outstandingly strong are the reroll wound rolls for purifiers, which really takes them from being a sort of fairly tame melee threat to utterly murderous with the rerolls to hit as well. And also the 6-inch deep strike charges, which means that you could have another way to get units to melee really quite reliably, in addition to say maybe a Terminator squad led by Drago. The 2 flaming mortal wound stratagems could be okay in a pinch, though feel situational, as could the charge debuff or the 4+ invulnerable save. I feel like they're all ones that you more have to look out to have an okay use of them though, as opposed to being staples that are going to be reliably useful every game. I kind of think that this detachment would have been a lot more interesting if you could have spammed more Purifier squads, but at the moment I think the limit of 3 of them is actually kind of bad for this detachment. I think ideally I'd want lots of small squads of 5 running around if I had the choice, maybe one big block of 10 for big damage, but given that you can only take 3 of them, you're not going to be getting quite as much hallowed ground really reliably. They may be in the sort of awkward place where they're both absolutely amazing damage dealers because of rerolls to hit and rerolls to wound when they need it, and also kind of being the buffing unit for the detachment that needs to be on the front lines and supporting other units, but also not really being all that tough to kill, at least for their points cost. As mentioned, this does come with some massive trade-offs as well. It definitely feels like there's more damage here, but losing Mists of Deimos, 3-inch deep strike, True Silver Armor, and the Sigil of Exigence are all really quite painful blows, so the big damage rerolls this attachment really do need to step up and make things count. I'd say it's strong enough to at least be interesting though. It does the job of being a very different way to play Grey Knights. I'd guess tips the balance for them to have enough damage output to be a lot more seriously scary. I think at first impressions, I guess it's probably not going to be quite as strong as the Index detachment, just given how powerful those tricks are, though I guess we'll wait and see what people make of it. Maybe I'll be proved wrong. In any case, let me know your thoughts as to all the Purifying Flame shenanigans down in the comments below. Do you think the detachment's strong or weak, and would you be tempted to push it on the board if you play Grey Knights yourself? As mentioned, a big thank you to the Toy Snowman store for sponsoring this video. If you're in Montreal or Canada in general, then feel free to check them out down in the video description for 15% off Warhammer things, if you're looking to order something in or back order something. Otherwise though, I'll leave this one there for now. Feel free to check out the Grotmas playlist link down in the video description. I'll add each detachment's video to that as I go along, and I'll look forward to checking back here for Space Marines tomorrow to see what the Astartes get as their new toys. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. Finally, if you've been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well. You can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support. Channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.